I think that they're more marketable, right? And I think the way I can tie that, I can tie the culture to the marketability is that generally a people-centric culture is a trusting culture, right? It's where people, the owner is able to delegate and listen and receive feedback and receive contributions for their employees. And again, in return, employees want to contribute and want to grow the business and they want to remain part of it. And I think that how that manifests over time often, and a lot of this has to do with the owner's personality, but with owners that are able to delegate and let go, what ends up happening is those owners become less relevant to the success of the business because they have good long-term people that care about it in place. And different companies will have different profitability metrics, and that ultimately drives the value of the business. But when that owner or owners are not relevant to the day-to-day operations of the business, that company becomes a lot more marketable. That opens up the buyer pool, it opens up competition, it opens up choice, it opens up negotiating leverage. So, really treating your people well does translate into value. And that can be a hard, intangible connection to make, but hopefully I did an okay job of explaining it.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today we're going to talk about a people-centric business, what it does for you, and really how it will help you grow and scale your business. We have with us the CEO of Calder Capital. They are mergers and acquisition specialists. They have a unique perspective around this. Hopefully you'll check out what they do if you're in that world. But Max Friar and I talk about people-centric business. And when we unpack this for you today, you'll realize how much he cares about the people around him. We even talk about why he cares about them so much, where it comes from, and some of the things that you will see, the uncommon approaches that he has inside a business that make it a people-centric business. My name is Gene Hammett. I am a CEO coach. We do executive coaching and manager coaching and everything in between to help your individuals grow, help you grow as a leader, and help your company be prepared for the next opportunity that you have. If you're curious about the work we do, if you're curious about what your leadership blind spot is, if you want to evolve, but you're not quite sure, or maybe you want to scale faster, you're not quite sure what's standing in your way, then we need to have a conversation because there's no cookie cutter approach to this. You're not going to be able to AI this. You're going to want to have a deep conversation with someone who's experienced, has some real context around fast growth and leadership and people and culture. I've written a book on how to have tough conversations, and many times people are avoiding something, and I wonder what you're avoiding. If you're really honest with yourself, you should probably have a conversation with someone that really knows what they're doing and give you some insight and perspective. Might as well be me. You're listening to my voice right now. Just send me an email, gene@genehammett.com. We will get on the call. We will have a deep conversation. I promise not to sell you anything because that's not the way I want to operate and show up in the world. I want to give, build trust. If you do want to explore working with us, we can talk about that at a later point. But that first call will be all about you and helping you grow to that next level as a leader. Now, here's the interview with Max. Hey, Max, how are you?
Doing wonderful. How are you?
I am absolutely fantastic. We got a great conversation coming up about people-centric businesses and leadership. I really am looking forward to hearing about your company too. Tell us about Calder Capital.
Yes, Calder Capital is a lower middle market mergers and acquisitions firm. That is fancy language for we facilitate transactions between buyers and sellers of businesses. So we have two distinct divisions, one that represents sellers of businesses, and these are usually family-owned, owner-operator, manufacturing, construction, distribution, and service businesses. And then we have a distinct buy-side practice where we represent the various people or entities that are looking to buy similar types of businesses.
Fantastic. I know there's a huge shift, it seems like, in not building a business, but buying one that's already somewhat healthy. And I don't want to go too much into this, but you have a unique perspective around this. We are going to be talking about scaling a people-centric business. When you look externally to your partners, your clients, and you see that they're not having a people-centric business, what is it that runs through your mind?
Well, Fortunately, most of our clients are well-established businesses, and they've been around for 10, 20. I mean, sometimes we just had a sale of a 150-year-old company. And so while those companies obviously go through growth and change and different iterations of leadership, in order to remain a business, a vibrant business, you generally have at least somewhat of a people-centric culture, because you've come to the realization that you need people and you need positive relationships to stay in business and stay profitable. You know, Very rarely do we come across I guess a good business where the owner is overly driven by profits or power. So and we tend to culturally not want to engage with buyers or sellers who are too focused on more or less greed or power. And frankly, that's because they don't let our process work. They try to dictate the process. So I don't have a ton of experience
Yeah.
with a lot of businesses, or I should say my overwhelming experience has been with buyers and sellers who recognize the value of culture and people and continuity of that when a transaction happens.
Let's take the other side to it. Like a business that does have that people-centric focus. They have a strong culture. They have good leadership across at all levels of the company, and they're living by their values. And I could go on and on and on. I would bet those businesses are worth more money than their counterparts.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think that they're more marketable, right? And I think the way I can tie that, I can tie the culture to the marketability is that generally a people-centric culture is a trusting culture, right? It's where people, the owner is able to delegate and listen and receive feedback and receive contributions for their employees. And again, in return, the employees want to contribute and want to grow the business and they want to remain part of it. And I think that how that manifests over time often, and a lot of this has to do with the owner's personality, but with owners that are able to delegate and let go, what ends up happening is those owners become less relevant to the success of the business because they have good long-term people that care about it in place. And different companies will have different profitability metrics, and that ultimately drives the value of the business. But when that owner or owners are not relevant to the day-to-day operations of the business, that company becomes a lot more marketable. That opens up the buyer pool, it opens up competition, it opens up choice, it opens up negotiating leverage. So, really treating your people well does translate into value. And that can be a hard, intangible connection to make, but hopefully I did an okay job of explaining it.
I love the way you framed it. For one, I agree with you. I'm just going to repeat back that a people-centric culture is a trusting culture.
Yes.
And that when things are working well and when they're not working well, that's what we need, right? We need that trust amongst the people. Let's switch gears, Max. I was looking at your background, and I'm being in mergers and acquisitions. I don't want to make this up, but do you have come more of a financial process driven background, or is it something different?
So I'm actually not that much of a financial technician. There are my business, the industry of mergers and acquisitions or business brokerage or investment banking. It's essentially just different words for the same type of business model. Most of the competitors that we face are led by financial technicians. And I think that's actually been a benefit for us not being founded or led by a financial technician, because I have more of an entrepreneurial system process, repeatability, scalability, marketing type mindset, forest view type mindset. And I think that's really helped us with systems and scale and marketing and automation to get us to be, one of the larger lower middle market firms in the United States. However, my mother was a math professor, my father is an accountant, so there's certainly some numbers, jumbled up in my head here.
And I saw some tax consulting in your background.
I did do a little tax education and consulting when I was just out of college, and I actually enjoyed it. So
Well,
I do enjoy numbers.
I enjoy numbers too. I'm an engineer, so I fit into this bucket too.
Yep.
I had to learn the human-centric way of business. I had to learn the importance of having some empathy at certain times. And I, there was a lot of evolutions in my own growth and leadership. But where did you pick up this people-centric business concept for you to take your company to that next level?
Well, I think I think personality wise, am generally a nice person. Probably if you think of a disc assessment, I'm like a low middle I. So I like people, but too much people interaction is a little overwhelming for me. So it's
Yeah.
probably a good balance from a personality perspective. I think I learned with some of my first jobs, I worked only in very small businesses, often family businesses or founder-led businesses, and I had managers who were very theory X at the first job I had. So it was basically do your job or you're fired. Very little empathy,
Yeah.
very little understanding of personal situations that would arise, and so I learned a lot about, and I had another manager who was essentially a micromanager. I mean, I couldn't send an email without him reviewing it, and it took him 3 days to review it. So I lasted 6 months at that job. So I think a lot of it was just learning about how I didn't want to be treated. And I know people talk about the golden rule all the time, but I don't know that many people actually, especially in leadership, actually use that. I don't know if they reflect on, well, how would I want to be treated if I was in this person's position? And I feel like I've been pretty good about thinking and seeing the uniqueness of every individual that works for us.
After hundreds of these interviews, and I've asked different types of questions because it's not a set formula for any of these interviews, I think more than 50% would say the same thing, that they
Okay.
created this incredible culture because they had an experience early in their career, and I wanted to create something that was very different. They wanted to go to work and enjoy it as opposed to just put their head down and do work.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Somebody, I don't know where it was, maybe it was a podcast or a book or a very wise person said to me as they reflected on being an entrepreneur or being a business owner, they said you have four things in life. You have family, friends, business, and hobbies. Pick two. And I've never, whether that's true or not, I've never forgotten that because it's actually felt really true to me in my life. And I've chosen family and work, and I definitely am wired as a workaholic. I come from a line of workaholics from a personality perspective, but no one wants to not have friends or hobbies. And so part of our culture has been, and I don't know if this is right, and I don't know if it's sustainable because I've never worked for a bigger company than I currently own, but I like to, as much as I can, work with people that I get along with and are friends. We do sometimes a hiking trip. I'm going to Peru to do the Inca Trail with two work colleagues later this year. Now, I will say that can make difficult conversations more difficult, but that's the life that I've chosen.
I love the honesty about being a workaholic, and a lot of people can probably relate to that inside their business, but as they start scaling their company, something starts to break. Sometimes it's their body, sometimes it's the relationships around them, like the family and whatnot. When you define yourself as a workaholic, I get it that you probably love the work you do, but does it get in the way of you growing and leading your company?
I mean, maybe ask other people that question. I would say, I mean, limitedly.
Yeah.
I would say when I become aware, I think I'm fairly self-aware. I think when I become aware of things through other people's feedback, which I openly solicit, I can change and I can pivot. I also I am not my business. I'm outside of my business. I will not be in my business someday. I'm 44 years old. I'm actively talking to two of my leaders about succession right now. And it doesn't mean that it's imminent, but in my business, I've seen so many times an owner be in their late 60s or 70s or even 80s, and they've never had any of these discussions, even with their children. And sometimes those situations don't end well. And what's most important to me is that the company continues beyond me. And I fully accept that that's going to happen someday.
Now, Max talked about succession planning just briefly here, but I wanted to touch on something. A lot of companies don't realize how important that is to get started early. So I'm here to be that sage advice of you don't do succession planning when you need it. You have to do it way in advance, years, many years sometimes, to be able to identify the right people, to develop them, to give them the experience and cycles. And when you do this well, you close those leadership gaps that happen when we professional entrepreneurs get to a certain age and we need to make sure that we're handing the business off to someone else. It also is an incredible opportunity if you do want to sell your business someday, is to have that succession planning in place and have those leadership touch points developing. And so that when you show your business to others, the culture, the leadership, they realize that it's not just you pulling all the levers and pulling everyone along, that everyone together is providing the level of leadership that adds to growth of the business, that actually makes your company more valuable. Back to Brian. I love it. And maybe it comes from your experience of seeing so many transactions that, we're here for a short period of time.
Yeah.
And so you're thinking about that intentionally.
Yeah.
I want to get us back to the topic of a people-centric business and a people-centric culture. What are the core principles that guide you with that concept?
I think of three things. So I think back to that golden rule: treating people the way you want to be treated makes everyone's lives better, less stress, less anxiety. I think when people are respected and listened to, they want to contribute, they want to advocate for your business and brand. And so not only is just your daily work experience better, but you really start getting that flywheel and that 1+1=3 effect. I think secondly, if people sense that an owner or manager is just using them as a means to money or power, then they naturally want to distance themselves from that situation, and therefore that's not a situation that has any element of sustainable growth to it, right? And I think really the last thing would just be that I want to work with my friends, whether that's right or wrong. I want to work with my friends, and obviously, if you want friends, you have to treat them with respect and with grace. And I think that where I'm still learning more and becoming more comfortable is that taking that 5% of honesty and finding a way to impart that with them, with being careful with their fragile psyche and their ego when necessary.
Now, you mentioned the 5%. I think we probably need to unpack that a little bit because I know it's part of the EO principles. How do you define the 5%?
I think it would almost be like to me, it's almost a feeling, right? It's probably like the heart beating a little harder, tightness in your chest. And it's almost you're compelled to have these conversations because you know that you're going to be stuck in that relationship or your business is going to suffer. But it's very difficult to will yourself into that type of conversation. And these would be very sensitive things. I mean, things about, people might think they're good at something, but they continue to, trip on their own shoelaces, or someone's in a role and they're just simply not performing in that role. And something needs to shift because it's going to start having impacts on the rest of the company if that happens. So I would say that that's the feeling of the 5% type conversations. It's almost like, do I really have to say this, or do I really have to go through this?
When you do have the courage to have 5% with others or with people on your team, what are some of the benefits of those conversations?
I feel that most often people are grateful. The right people want to hear the truth, and the right people, I think you need to make sure that you give them some distance and time after imparting that truth so they can process it. But, oftentimes they actually are, I feel, drawn closer, to you because they realize you're someone that will give them deep honesty. Whereas I don't know that most of us, it's funny to think about how most of us might not be getting the honest truth. So I think it's more of a trust, almost more of a bond when you are willing to do it. Now, the wrong people, I shouldn't say the wrong people, no one's wrong, but I think people that, maybe don't have high emotional intelligence, or they have a very fragile ego, or they're unconfident. I think sometimes they can struggle with the truth. So, and you don't necessarily know what you're going to get always. So that's why I think it feels risky, right?
Thanks, Max. With that, I know it takes a lot of courage to open up that way. I know I know it's just the two of us, but you might thinking other people are listening in, which they're not yet.
That's okay. I expect people will be listening to this, so it's fine. I don't
when they
mind.
publish it, they will listen in.
I don't mind.
One of the other questions I really like to kind of bring forward in this conversation of building this people-centric business is we've all made mistakes in our journey of entrepreneurship and leadership. Can you reflect back on one of the mistakes that helped you grow and be the leader you are today?
Sure. So I am naturally opportunistic, and I tend to see the infinite good in all people. And then, so kind of like the result of that is that when I see someone struggling, the first thing I think is, maybe they're just not in the right seat. And so let's get them there. Let's work with them. Let's try to talk to them about what's not working, what is working. Let's see if there's something else that they want to do or they're interested in or they can shift into that's a better fit for them. I think that it's difficult for me, though, when they're just not a right fit and they're on the wrong bus to move them along. And I think that as we've grown, we've become more cognizant of the people and situations that kind of act as anchors on our progress. And it's very hard to grow if we're spending too much time correcting the errors of the past. And it's difficult to grow if we're constantly in a reactive state versus a proactive state. But some of my mistakes have been, not addressing those situations fast enough.
I, I've had the same problem too. I care so much about people, and one of my rules, and I wrote this book, it should never be a surprise. And I still believe that today. I don't think you should have someone on. I know they say fire fast, but I think you've got to give people a few, I don't know if it's chances is the right word, but you got to coach them and you got to support them, because otherwise you don't really get to see it. Now, I also know that when they're not leaning forward, they're not trying to grow, they're not being adaptable, they're being, stuck. I don't have much patience for that either.
Yeah.
When you're working with people, and you've had many cycles of this through all the people you've hired and whatnot, what happens in your culture when you find others aren't being as people centric as you think they should be?
I think it would come down to just having that conversation. I will say that I think the other leaders I have here have helped me become more people centric. When I was younger, I had a you know I had a and I still have a high drive, but I mean, my goodness, take me back 15, 20 years ago, and I was just a force. And I think I was fairly low on empathy, to be honest with you. And I think some of that came out of my initial working experiences where my boss was, I saw this person who grew a company. To me, that seemed unbelievably successful at that time, just to have a company. But he was very harsh and mean with people. And, I think I might have emulated that to an extent at first. And so it took me some time to realize that that was not the way to go. So, I mean, I fortunately don't feel like I have that issue here. And I feel like now that I am where I am from a, I guess, emotional intelligence development standpoint, I think it's going to be really hard for anyone to get away with, or even want to, or even come into Calder if they are not very cognizant of their team and how their team is feeling, how their team is performing. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but I don't have that situation, fortunately, very often. And I think it's because the culture here is fortunately strong. And my number one priority is to keep it strong. I mean, just to be clear here, in the past year, I've said, look, we've grown really well, or we've been at Inc. 5000. This will be 4 years now.
Yeah.
That feels good, but it's culture before growth. That is, there's no way we can sustain this growth. I don't care if we go backwards. I don't care if we shrink. I would rather shrink than damage our culture.
Now, Brian just said something really great. I want to put a spotlight on it. Culture before growth. What he's really saying here is culture is more important than growth. If you are looking at growth of your business and you are thinking about the numbers, the leading and lagging indicators, they're fun and they're easy to measure and track. What's hard is to deal with the people issues and treating the people the way they want to be treated, the way they need to be treated, and really being the leader that they want to follow. Now, only you can answer the question of, are you that kind of leader? But I remind you that people first inside your leadership will give you more benefit than just focusing on growth alone. Because at some point in time, that growth begins to break down the chaos. I've seen it happen over and over and over. This is my focus. This is who I am as a coach, helping people navigate growth and as they change. So I'd love to connect with you and help you grow if you need that. But just remember, people before growth. Back to Max. We've been talking about a people-centric business. Is there anything that we've left out of this conversation that you feel like needs to be brought forward?
There was a question about uncommon approaches to create a work environment where people are aligned and they're performing at a high level. And I wanted to just give two examples. Maybe this will be helpful. Probably other leaders are doing the same thing. In fact, I couldn't think of anything that was way uncommon that we're doing, but I can't stress enough that people have things in their lives that come up, and one thing I've done is I've given them a lot of time and grace when they're dealing with difficult circumstances in their lives. And I'll give two examples. We've recently had a first-time mother go on maternity leave. She is a top-notch performer at our company. And there is no way that I was going to dictate when she came back fully, that is someone who I'm going to, she will come back and she will be a long-term player, but I cannot press upon her the needs of the performance needs of the company when she's going through that experience. And I think secondly, we have another top performer, and he unfortunately got cancer. This is the first time I've had anyone in 12 years have cancer at our company, and he's had to be on leave for many months. But it's so important that we conveyed to him that he has a place to come back to, and he knows that. Because again, I look at this and I think, what if this was me? Like, I'm going through this terribly scary situation. The last thing that I want to worry about is my job or my economic security. So these are the type of situations that, these golden rule situations. And this is not golden rule in a religious context. This is just treating people how you want to be treated yourself. As long as I'm leading, this is how we're going to act.
I love those stories. I'm glad I asked the question. Sometimes I don't know what we're going to get. And I don't want to keep you off guard here, but those two examples show the honor and really respect that you give your people. And that's the reason why we're having you on the podcast to talk about a people-centric business. Max, thanks for being here and being a guest on the show.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Wow, fantastic interview today. People-centric business. It just has a good sound to it. A lot of people actually run numbers-centric businesses, but they never say that. They want the feeling that they have a people-centric business. Hopefully you are the kind of leader that truly does put people first, over profits, over process, and over product. People matter. When you think of leadership and you think of growth thinking. As always, encourage. We'll see you next time.